Hello, my name is Mark, and I thank you so much for coming by today. Well, if you can tell by this clip, my backyard is bursting with color and life and energy. That deep Naples yellow is just exploding in the background. We're going from spring to summer, and I live on this lake in New England, and it is really I'm just blessed to have that view to wake up to every day, and I don't ever want to take it for granted. But anyway, we're here to talk about something else. That is this Caran D'Ache 12 tube gouache studio paint set. Now, this paint set comes with 12 tubes of paint. It comes with this nifty little brochure and this neat little brush that it comes with as well. So we'll talk about those things in a moment, but what I do want to talk about first is the paint set itself. And this brush is it's a brush, and it's going to be used in the video to paint with. What I want to talk about, though, is the colors. And right out of the package, this Caran D'Ache set has no information on it. There's no pigment information, there's no light fast information, so it's hard to tell. Now, my background in gouache painting goes back to the 80s when I used to do photo retouching, and I used to do some just illustration work where I would airbrush with gouache, and I would paint with a paintbrush with gouache, and I absolutely loved working with gouache. It was my favorite medium to work with, and I used specifically Winsor & Newton gouache paints. They were professional grade, and they did the job the way I liked them to do. This Caran D'Ache set, well, it leaves a little bit to be desired, because I was expecting a more professional grade than student grade, but I think what we have here is a student grade set, especially because there's no pigment information, there's no light fast information, and there's a consistency issue with the paints themselves. So they're made a little bit differently. They're made with a vegetable binder, so there's no information on even what the binder is, just that it's a vegetable binder. For a brand like Caran D'Ache to be sort of secretive or just not revealing that information is surprising, because their reputation is pretty high in the art supply community. And I was a little disappointed to find that these were more student grade than I thought. I'd had these paints kind of hanging out for a year or so, and I was waiting for the right time to jump in and try them again. I have not painted with gouache in probably 20 years or so, maybe more. And it's something that I've been wanting to get back into. I watched a video by another YouTuber about a year ago or so, and they were painting with for the first time with gouache. They had never used it before, and unfortunately they used it like watercolor. Now, like watercolors, when you sometimes come across a binder in the tube, you'll see right here, that vegetable binder can sometimes come right out of the tube. So what I use is I have a little tool that I go straight into the tube and mix it in the tube. So I mix the paint and the binder together so I don't get that gooey kind of gunky look. You can use like a wooden skewer. I have a little metal tool that I use, but again, for this ultramarine blue, I had to do the same thing as the magenta and go right in and just mix within the tube. So that's something you can do. It happens with watercolor as well. It's not a big deal. Gum arabic sometimes will come squirting out of the tube with watercolors. Again, just go in and you can mix it right in the tube. So that's a little gem of a secret there. So you can take that. So back to these paints. They are wonderful colors. I am not complaining about the colors. What I do have a concern with is that gouache traditionally is opaque, whereas watercolors are traditionally transparent. Now, you can have transparent gouache and you can have opaque watercolor. Yellow ochre is a good example of a pretty much classic opaque watercolor. It acts very much like gouache. And gouache, you can see by the yellow in the chart on the top that the yellow is fairly transparent. I'm using a generous amount of paint here, so I'm surprised at how thin that yellow really was. This line test here is going from straight paint into a diluted, watered down mixture, and so you can see how it can trail off. The thing is, with gouache, there's different ways to use gouache. You can use gouache straight out of the tube with thick paint to get a very heavy, opaque look, or you can water it down a lot and use it just like watercolor. It will give you sort of a hazed, sort of chalky glow outside your black lines if you're drawing on a black line drawing. But you can see here that I'm trying to reactivate these colors, which you can do, but they stain pretty well. I mean, that's pretty strong colors to stay in that that paper there. So, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to bleed them together to see how they interact with each other. Kind of like watercolor. It's sort of like blending the colors together in a diluted fashion so you can see how they work together. And they work exactly as you would expect, so there's nothing surprising here. In fact, I really enjoyed doing this kind of a test because I love seeing how these colors play together, especially this last one where you get that real nice turquoise in there. So the colors themselves I don't have a problem with. I wish I knew the pigment information. I wish Caran D'Ache has disclosed the light fast information. That would have been nice to know. So I'm going to put this to a practical test. Now, typically I would use watercolor paper for this, but right here I'm going to use just exactly what I love to work in. It's a handbook journal with a black and white pen and ink drawing that I did a few weeks ago. And I want to paint right on top of this and see how it's going to handle. This paper is not usually meant for water mediums, but I've found that I can use it, and as long as I don't go too heavy, it works just great. So you'll see here that the diluted version of the gouache is working very much like watercolor, and that is exactly what I was hoping for. I really love watercolor. I didn't work with watercolor years ago. That wasn't my sort of passion. Gouache was it for me, especially with airbrushing. I loved airbrushing with gouache and with ink because you could get such rich colors, and with gouache you could get that matte finish. And I really enjoyed that, especially doing photo retouching where I would have these matte photos that were going to be used in print, and you could just airbrush right on top of the photos, getting rid of crow's feet, getting rid of stray hairs or acne or anything like that. So I was doing corporate photo retouching, and it was easy to use gouache to just go right over it because it made it opaque and you could just hide those flaws easily. So that was a great tool to use back in the 80s, especially with airbrushing. Nowadays we do things digitally, so it's not such a necessity anymore. So I haven't reached out for gouache in a long time. It's been many years. So this is exciting for me to be painting with gouache for the first time in so many years. So this particular set, I saw this on Amazon one day or something. I forget where I saw it. And I thought, I'd love to try that. It's a great brand. Caran D'Ache is a great brand with a great reputation. It was at a good price point. I think it was about $40 to $50 I paid for this 12 tube set. And it comes with the little nifty brush there too. So why not? Why not give it a shot? And I'm not disappointed with it. I really think I'll enjoy these paints. But again, to me, these are a more student grade paint than a professional grade. I have a small set of M. Graham gouache paints that I think there's 5. There's a black, white, red, yellow, and blue in the M. Graham set that I haven't opened yet. I haven't even tried them yet. So I'd be curious to see how they pair up against this Caran D'Ache set. I'm expecting the M. Grahams to be a lot more professional grade. So you can see here in this illustration that, yeah, you get some really good colors. You can layer just like watercolor. It's not hard to use, and it's very familiar. Here, however, in the same sketchbook, this is going to be straight out of the tube, heavy dose of gouache paint, that opaque paint layering that we are all familiar with gouache. If you're not familiar with gouache, then this is pretty much what you would expect. It reminds me of the old poster paints or tempera paints. It's not unlike other kinds. You can use like casein painting, which is an old style, almost like a tempera paint. But gouache is its own unique thing. It is in the watercolor family. They're siblings, I guess you could call them. And it behaves like watercolor. However, because there's so much of the paint in there that it's just opaque, there's just a chalkiness about them that some people just love it. So a painting like this one here gives off a really nice graphic appeal. You can see how when I paint over the black lines, which were drawn with Sharpie, by the way, that it just sort of puts that haze of chalkiness over the black lines. So how do these paints fare in sort of a plein air setting, painting outdoors, or even just painting indoors and doing a landscape from reference? So I figured I'd use the landscape out my back door and just try to see if I could mimic the scene that I was seeing there. Well, I haven't painted with gouache in a long time, so here I'm trying to just get my bearings with it and see if it's still familiar with me. The thing I love about gouache is it's sort of the opposite of watercolor, where watercolor you lay down a wash of a very thin color and you build on that, making it darker as you go. With gouache, you can lay down a dark color and then build on that with lighter colors. So once it dries, and it dries with that matte finish, you can paint lighter colors on top of it, which is what I love about gouache. However, with this particular set, the Caran D'Ache paints aren't really, they're not totally opaque, especially that yellow. It'll show in just a minute. There's a part where I'm doing the tops of the trees where it looks like I'm painting with like a jelly. It's not the kind of colors that the other colors are fine, but it's not the kind of color that I wanted. I was hoping for a more opaque laydown, kind of like this white here, where I'm just going right over that blue and it's working perfectly. But once I get to that yellow, it just is a little disappointing. So here I'm just filling in some areas and getting the whole scene prepped, and I lay down this orange color, which it's not bad too, but it's also got the same problem that the yellow has. Maybe it's their yellow pigment that they're using. I don't know. It's just giving off this sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, like a glue-like or almost a just sort of a slick texture to it. I'm not sure how to describe it. And it's not appealing. I don't like it at all. I want it to have that chalky feel. I want it to have that opaque resistance to it. And it just doesn't. It has this sort of, I don't know, kind of oily, slimy texture to it. It's not fun. So, especially the yellow. The yellow was a real disappointment for me. Would I recommend buying this set? At a price point of $40 to $50, I would say it's expensive for a student grade set. But it's 12 tubes of gouache that I think any beginner would really, really enjoy having a set like this. If you're just starting out in gouache or you're new to gouache, this is a great way to go, where you're not spending a ton of money on these. It's still not super cheap. They have smaller sets. I think they have a 6-tube set or maybe an 8-tube set. I went for the 12 just because I wanted more convenience color, and that's what I got. And I'm not disappointed with it. I'm disappointed with the yellow. That's the only one. And as you can see here, going in with the yellow, you have to go really heavy with it and make sure everything underneath it's really dry. Adding white to the yellow is a big help, because the white is tremendous. It's doing its job. It's doing what I expected. You can see you can almost paint just white right over it. There's a little house in that corner there. So overall, were these paints worth the value? I'd give it probably 7 out of 10 stars if I had to rate it that way, because I just expected a little bit more and I got a little bit less. So again, great starter kit for somebody just getting into gouache, a great introduction or a great refresher if you've been out of it like me for a long time. I mean, 20 plus years out of gouache and coming back to it, here it is. Now the brush that came with it, I want to touch on that too. The brush is not the best brush I've ever used. It's doing the job fine, but after it dried out and I cleaned it and everything, the hairs were split. It's just sort of a cheap brush that I think they threw in there. So it's not a high quality brush. Definitely what I would consider a student grade set. They call it their studio gouache set. I call it a student grade gouache set. But still, it's a lot of fun. I'm definitely going to pick it up again at some point. Not going to be my go-to paints. I'm still going to work with watercolor. I think this is not really driving my passion for gouache painting. But once I crack open the M. Graham paints, maybe I'll do a video on those and do a side-by-side comparison or something, or just a brief comparison, and see how they pair up next to each other. This was a lot of fun to do. I'm really glad I invested my time and my money into this set, because stepping out of my comfort zone is not easy, especially at an older age like this. I want to spend my time in my comfort zone. I like my comfort zone. But if I'm going to step out, I want it to be worth my while. This was definitely worthwhile for me. I enjoyed it. It was a learning experience, and I love the result that I got from it. Will I paint with these again? Yes, definitely. A lot? Probably not. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was entertaining, at least for you, to see some new artwork and to see how to use these paints. Thank you so much for watching today. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do, because I'll bring you more content like this and some reviews and some more artwork and some more conversation. As always, I hope you're doing great. Thank you for coming by, and as always, God bless.